again, I think in sort of the spirit of what Joel said, we'd be happy to be just have comments along the way, because these were just some thoughts to organize things a little bit. And and on this, I just sort of put down the kinds of commentaries that come along, and I sort of group them very broadly here, but commentaries on articles, which is the kind of thing that an editor-in-chief like Joel will send out and say, well, we've got an interesting article and I want somebody to provide a perspective on it, and what does it mean for the field. And it could be one that represents a great advance, or it could be one with policy implications or methodological implications. Sometimes you're asked to address a particular topic, like the commentary that was sent out that I wrote, you know, at the start of the prior Trump administration on the Trump administration and the environment. So that was at the invitation of the New England Journal to comment on what was obviously an important issue. And, I think November 6th, there's certainly going to be broad implications for environmental health, depending on the outcome of the election. Sometimes just you're asked to write about your thoughts about personal experiences, things that have happened. And, I think probably these sort of invitations come more often to senior folks, but could also come to junior folks, like, for example, somebody asked you to write about getting started in the field of environmental health and what's involved, which could be a chance to talk to your colleagues. So this is a very broad organization. Joe, let me see if you want to comment here.
Yeah, just to add on here. So, at EHP, we have an article type we call commentaries, which are themselves are a sort of author-initiated article type, regular peer-reviewed in the regular way, but expected to be, written and defended based on experience and but based on scientific literature and summarizing things, and those can be kind of opinionated, but are expected to kind of pass muster as science-based, I guess I would say. And then we have the kind of thing, commentaries on particular articles, which we at EHP call invited perspectives. And those are, an opportunity for someone, generally somebody fairly far along in their career, to write comments on a paper that's being published. But the usual path to that is that somebody has acted as a peer reviewer for the paper along the way. It's quite common that invited perspective will be somebody who's an expert in the field, who was asked to be a peer reviewer, and then their peer review was very insightful about how that work relates to the larger literature or the larger science or the policy implications. And then, so in some ways, being a good peer reviewer, you can sort of, you can kind of be auditioning to write a commentary, even as it is when you write a peer review of a paper. So we do now invited perspectives on about a third of the papers that we publish in the journal. So that's one opportunity. And then there's more of the editorial content, in which somebody is invited to give a presentation that might be in a journal that might be unrelated to a topic, an article under consideration, but something that we want to sort of invite someone to do. And a lot of journals will do this. They want to have a commentary on a certain topic, politically important, fast moving area. They'll invite someone to be an author of a commentary. So that's kind of the big picture of how these things work, at least at EHP and other journals. There are other journals that don't publish any commentaries at all to speak of. So, most journals now, in the for-profit publishing world are, just trying to collect as many article publishing charges as possible. That's their business model. And that will be original research. and they will, just sort of get as many as they can and push them through a peer review process, which might be rigorous or nominal, depending on the journal, and publish as much as they can, as fast as they can. But then there are society commentaries, and so as you probably know, many scholarly societies have an official journal that they historically societies published those journals, in-house. And now pretty much most journals, most societies, scholarly societies, farm that work out to a for-profit publisher with some kind of a relationship with the society, with some money changing hands one way or the other, usually, but not always. And part of that deal, I know for ISEE, for example, is that the society has the freedom to publish a handful of society-sponsored commentaries in the official journal every year. So until last year, that was the journal Epidemiology, and now it's the journal Environmental Epidemiology. And those journals will um, sort of, the society gets a proposal. We should think we want a commentary on X, let's say greening the environmental health conferences. And then they will, someone will write that. And then because the society has a little bit of control into into what the journal publishes, the journal will publish it basically with the peer review process being managed by the society rather than by the journal's usual processes. That's just a few.
Yeah, well, we got started. Obviously, we're just sort of going through some general thoughts, and I've got a few slides that we've used to organize things, and we're inviting anyone who wants to comment to do so as we go along or to raise questions. So
Great. Well, my apologies for the technical difficulties. Maybe I'll let you. Shall I do a brief introduction, or have you already done that?
oh, I think it's too late for that.
Yeah. Okay. Have at it.
Okay, all right. And I might comment in the last year, I think for EHP, I did comment on a particular paper related to methods of systematic review in environmental health, and then published, I guess it would fit in the commentary category, a paper with Lindsay Marr on sort of where things stand on the airborne transmission of respiratory pathogens. So both in EHP. So moving on, I mean, so, I think one question that we can explore for those of you who are just sort of starting is, how do you get into the business of writing commentaries? And if you want to do that, and do you write commentaries? I mean, I have lots of junior faculty who send me commentaries or op-eds they want to publish because they really want to get their views out on important environmental topics, which certainly makes sense. And I suspect that many of you who are listening in are sort of in that category. So, I think this question of sort of, do you want to launch a commentary on a hot topic? Well, there's no reason not to. I think we'll have to hear from Joel how he handles these as they come in. And, I think question is, do you have something important to say? Is what you're going to say, you're going to contribute? Do you know what your message is? Sometimes if you want to comment on a particular article, it may be better to just have a tightly written letter to the editor. Although I have to say, at least I don't very often write letters. In fact, almost never is the case. I will often read something and say, gee, I should write a letter, but then I end up not doing it. And, again, it'd be useful to hear from Joel about letters versus commentaries and, making points. And then, if you're invited to write a commentary, I mean, I think I mostly say yes. And I mean, sometimes it's interesting. I mean, you have to say something. This is now when you write a commentary, you're making points. You're not saying table one shows. So it's a different kind of writing, and you're putting your opinions out there. And generally, if you put your opinions out there on any topic, some will agree and some will disagree. And you know, whatever you say sticks with you forever, presumably in the literature. So just some thoughts about, you know, both independently launching one or responding to an invitation from an editor of a journal to write one. So Joel, over to you.
Well, I was just looking at the topics that have been covered before. So you've heard about, from some speakers already in this series around, wanting to do a commentary. So I think the kinds of commentaries that I see that people, might want to do would be highly, might be highly policy relevant or have even sort of a political angle to them to some extent. And so I think if that's, that's the focus of what you want to do, that's fine. I think it's a little more of a challenge then to get those published in a, high impact kind of journal. So I think thinking about it, based on the, it's going to be very different depending on what journal you're trying to get something published in, knowing who your audience is, knowing if it's the right audience for that. We publish, sometimes something will come up that, somebody wants to publish a commentary, let's just say on, PFAS, hot topic. Everybody wants to read science on it. Everybody's interested. It's everywhere. They're so-called forever chemicals. And somebody wants to propose that we should be regulating PFAS as a class rather than an individual chemical or something like that. And that would be, sort of that would be an example of something we did, several years ago now. Somebody submitted a commentary and did that, and it was, goes through a regular peer review process. And there will be people who say, oh, that's a terrible idea. And other people will say that's a good idea. And that usually means that you're saying something interesting and that the community wants to, get out there on one side or another of that issue, and the various vested interests might have something to say. So that's also interesting.
Rob, you might comment on the commentary we published, it's now 10 years ago, on flavorings, because I think we wrote that and submitted it unsolicited to JAMA, if I remember right.
Yeah, this was a JAMA viewpoint that John and I, with then a postdoctoral fellow as a first author, submitted, thinking about flavorings in e-cigarettes. And I think maybe the take home message for this group was that it was something that we thought about that was new, and at the time, the behavioralists ruled the roost in tobacco regulatory science, and they were interested in flavors as a way to promote use by children. That was sort of the focus. It continues to be a major focus of tobacco regulatory science, but at the time, nobody had thought about what was in the flavors and what they might do to lungs. So this was a topic that was in the news. The science community was already thinking about it, and we had an idea for a novel take on it. And the details probably are not that important, but we focused on one particular chemical that we were interested in and knew something about, and then we expanded it to sort of the uncertainty around many other chemicals that continue to burn vapes at the time and continue to be in vapes that are respiratory toxins.
So Rob, were you invited to write that, or you sort of did it on your own?
No, we just did. We had an idea. We thought, hey, this is a neat idea, and the postdoc ran with it, And then, John gave a lot of good suggestions to both of us because John has a lot of experience with this. And we sent it to the JAMA, and they were excited about it as well. We didn't have to wait. It probably went to somebody like you, and they thought, hey, this is a neat idea. And then they were very hands-on. They wanted it right away. They wanted it out right away, and the editor helped us craft it. Actually, we sort of went back and forth for a week or 10 days with sort of a lot of edits to it, and then it came out, and it got a fair amount of attention, and John looked it up recently. It had gotten a few hundred citations because it was I think it was the first time somebody thought about this. So I think that the key things are it's topical, and it's a new idea. I think those are the things that made it successful. And it didn't matter that it was speculative, that there was a lot of uncertainty to it, because it was a commentary. We could get away with that. We didn't have to show much in the way of data. So I don't know. John,
here's an elephant in the room question, I think, for this mostly early career audience that's, I think, out here today, is to what extent do you think JAMA takes seriously a submission like that if the authors are already famous people versus somebody who is just sort of coming in out of the who they've never heard of before? Do you have a sense if they would have been just as excited about that if they had never heard of you, Rob, or you, John, when writing this thing?
I mean, I don't think they recognized me. John writes for a lot of journals. They might have recognized John, but I'm not sure. Did you know the editor?
I can't remember. I mean, I do know a lot of the editors at JAMA from interactions over the years. So possibly, I mean, I think to answer Joel's question, this goes back a little bit before, when you're early on in your career, if you write an editorial on an important issue and then you have great thoughts, are you going to get serious consideration? I think that's really,
that is true.
That's the fair question. And, you might, I'm going to just say that in general, you probably would not, unfortunately.
So I get asked to review a fair number of these kinds of perspectives and viewpoints and commentaries at journals like JAMA or New England Journal. And my impression is that in most of the cases, they fall into really interesting perspectives from people who are who are not famous, or kind of mundane perspectives from people who are. Yeah. That's kind of
that could be that could be. Well, let me see what else we have lurking here.
So just before we leave that, Joel, what do you think when you see an what did you call it? An interesting, not a mundane review from somebody you've never heard of?
Yeah.
What do you as a journal editor,
I'm much more excited about that, right? Obviously, that's a really interesting perspective from somebody who is going to be more exciting than somebody who's used to having everybody pay attention to what they're saying, and they're saying the same thing as they always say, right? That's kind of.
So you would, if you do due diligence, would you go and what if you go and look them up, or?
I don't know. I mean, we would have a, if it's an interesting
topic, an interesting idea, you just let it go.
As long as we're not concerned about a conflict of interest, we would just move it forward and send it for peer review and, get it going.
So just to move on, I mean, I think this is pretty obvious stuff. And the only thing I'll make, and again, Joel and Rob can speak to this. I mean, the writing style, you just have to change your mindset when you start writing a commentary. And you have to generate ideas and flow and what are the points you want to make and how are you going to make them. And, typically these commentaries are relatively brief, probably 750, 1,000 words, which is not very much. And so you really have to get right to the point. And it's okay to say, I think, or whatever. In fact, Joel, you can comment on it. Seems like at EHP, you want attribution of thoughts to individuals and not sort of neutral, passive voice kind of stuff. You want to say, in my opinion, or it is the view of the author, or something like that. I mean, I've noticed that change over the last few years that if something is not sort of referenceable, and the point is the author's point, you want the author to say, here's what I think, essentially, and acknowledge that it's the author's thought. So, I mean, that, and the only other comment I'll make is that when you write these things, it's sort of easy to slip into jargon and cliche language, and just need to stay out of that territory. But figure out the points you want to make, and then how you're going to make them and what the flow is.
Well, we've been talking for long enough. I think it's time to engage the crowd here. And I see there is one question posted in the chat from Brazil, which asks, we're writing a commentary to highlight children. I don't have a way of turning on your voice, otherwise I would.
Jonathan, can you turn on, can you unmute Rafa?
Will do. Here we go.
Hi, Rafa, how are you?
Are you able to speak? Well, I'll continue reading until he chimes in here. So he's writing a commentary to highlight children's vulnerability to pesticides, exposures, and health effects, but we have no experience in this format. We want to raise attention for the problem and kind of connecting the scientific knowledge. We expect the audience to be health practitioners and decision makers, and to highlight the need for exposure identification, notification, and management. Would it be better to focus on LMIC or rural children, or just assume this is a global problem in rural and urban areas and make it more broad? Or do we need something new in this topic to make it more interesting, or just connecting the dots seems like a good idea? So this, I think, is actually, there's a lot of questions in here about how you might frame something and how would you get it published. And my thought is that you actually need to actually be thinking about a specific journal that you might want to publish it in, because different journals view these kinds of things very differently. It's not a one size fits all. But I think that, unfortunately, most journals don't have the resources to respond to every pre-submission inquiry. So you have to kind of base it on what you see that journal has published in the way of commentaries in the past, and try to second guess it unless you can get the ear of the editor to talk to about this. The questions here is what you want to do. Is it novel or not? And are you raising a new point or not, which I think is going to be more interesting than something which is well established, but you're just trying to have an application in a new country or a new setting. And if that's the case, then it's possible that the right place for that commentary is a more localized journal rather than a international journal. So that would be.
And I think the other comment I would add is if you want to reach sort of decision, I mean, we expect the audience to be health practitioners and decision makers. And I think the question of, how do you reach decision makers, and probably a place that is not surefire to reach decision makers is publication in a peer-reviewed journal. I mean, I think having the publication is good because then it can be the basis for some sort of further dissemination mechanism, and, whether that's then trying to get an op-ed, or you're going to write a letter to some sort of legislative or regulatory body, because you now have the sort of the credential of having the paper published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, which could be valuable. So I think this is tricky territory, because I know those who are doing environmental health want to reach an important audience.
More questions or comments? Sure, you don't just want to have a couple of talking heads here, so let's have some more interaction. Rob?
Yeah, I'm thinking about maybe, in my introductory comments, it might be a moment that I could interject a couple of things. This is part of a series and a couple of different career development programs that increasingly are well coordinated between the International Society for Children's Health and Environment, that has a research to action fellowship, and a children's center career development seminar series that we sponsor at USC. And the idea is to teach people new skills that they can use to have more impact. And so a commentary is a nice place to start, because as a junior investigator, it's good for your career as well. So that's part of the reason that we've had a couple of different webinars on this particular topic. And but I think the idea is that there are many other tools, and they actually, I think of them as fitting together. As John suggested, you might write a commentary, then you'd write an op-ed piece, then you'd go and depending on the topic, you'd testify to, you'd write a comment, you'd write comments to an EPA regulatory document, when it's posted online, or you might write a policy brief, or you could go, depending on the topic, you might go and speak to your city council meeting if you get an issue on the agenda. So I think the idea is that there are many different ways of making an impact. And, as John suggests, maybe a commentary is not directly the most important way, but I think it's an important piece of it, because it gives you a credential that you might not have otherwise, unless you've written a lot of papers in this area.
I wonder if there's, we heard from Rafa. I wonder if there's anybody else working on a commentary or planning one right now who'd want to share what they're thinking about, and we could sort of talk through the path, what a commentary might address, and what are the points you want to make. If there is somebody among that bunch of participants, perhaps some of you are contemplating a commentary.
I can't see who's on the call, but if anybody from the research to action group that I'm involved with is on, please ask for some advice.
It's free.
I could tell you about ours.
Here, Allison says she's going to chime.
Allison, good. Can we unmute Allison?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. I guess I would love to have some input from Rob and others on navigating the process of collaborative commentary writing. I think I can imagine that if one person is really passionate about a topic and is going to lead the charge, then it could be, a unified vision that is pretty easy to coalesce around. But I think when you have multiple co-authors who each have different perspectives and are trying to, collaboratively reach a unified message, that I think is for us maybe been a little bit more challenging. So I don't know if I have a very clear question, but just any tips and tricks on getting everyone towards a clear message in that process.
I'll make a quick comment. Sometimes I get commentaries sent to me with sort of the would you sign on to this kind of thing. And they often come from my friends, sometimes very senior people. And very often they do have strong points of view. And sometimes when you're writing a commentary, you're writing beyond the evidence. In other words, you're writing about what it means, or areas where um, you know, unlike, say, doing a systematic review and perhaps a meta-analysis and saying, here's where the evidence stands, now you're sort of going beyond that. So I sometimes don't sign on to things because I have discomfort with what the message may be. I think your question in part two is about collaborative writing. And I've done that. And I actually think in general, when I've done it, it's been a good process and sort of working with colleagues who you can work with. I mean, there has to be good opportunities for exchange that can, I think, help move things forward. Now, I'll turn to that piece that we provide as background that was in the New England Journal that I wrote with Tom Burke and Bernie Goldstein. And Tom and Bernie were the co-authors I selected because they had both been the assistant administrators at EPA for research and development, and Tom, the science advisor, Bernie in the Reagan administration, so a while ago in a Republican administration, Tom in the last couple of years of the Obama administration. So we wanted to have a diversity of points of view. And in working on this, I mean, I do think we sort of coalesced our viewpoints, and they were not really necessarily the same when we started. And if you read the piece carefully, you'll can perhaps even think who might have written this piece or that piece of it. And I think it was useful to bring us all together.
So we got another question. Can we so Allison asks another question. How do you all approach the question of whether to invite folks from outside academia, especially NGO advocates, to contribute as co-authors? This has a very, very specific context. And maybe, I don't know, Allison, if you want to comment, or I can fill in a little bit. This is an article. We have a group of people, including on this in this writing group. Allison's one of the junior investigators, and there's a woman from Africa who's quite interested in lead, and lead in Africa, and it's been challenging to focus it, and we've settled on, I think we've coalesced around the idea of lead in paint as being a low-hanging fruit for lower and middle income countries, that you could regulate this and you could have an impact. And that's maybe enough of the detail that you need. But we've had some discussion about whether we want to bring in some NGOs, a couple of people in particular from an NGO that's done work on lead paint in Africa, and working with policymakers and have experience in several different countries. So that's the context. And I think there's been a little bit of discomfort on some people's part about, do we want an advocate as a co-author on this? Is that where you're going, Allison?
Yes, I think oftentimes we are aligned with advocates in what we think is an important message, but then I think there's a fear often among academics of being seen as not or unbiased or more biased if we include people outside of academia in our as co-authors.
Well, obviously, there's not a right answer to that question. And people stake out, I think, and I've seen in your seminar series, stake out all points along this spectrum of, do you want to be seen as an advocate yourself? Do you want to be seen as having associated with people who are advocates, or do you want to be holding yourself out as some sort of a, independent scientist? And I think that's up for, there's not a right answer. And I think people have different levels of comfort being at different places along that spectrum. Somebody, John's in a great position to speak about this, having been, I think been considered a scientist and rather than an advocate, but being pilloried as an advocate at certain points by, say, the tobacco industry at certain points in time. And that's kind of an interesting, sort of no matter what you do, I think, to sort of avoid being seen as being, an advocate, once you have a certain role, you will be seen that way anyway. Right?
Yeah, just to elaborate, I mean, the answer to that, Allison's question, like all questions, is it depends. And I think, I mean, if you're talking about a pathway from evidence to action, various sorts of, and we're using advocate in a very broad term way here. I mean, there's science-based advocacy organizations that are critical partners. So I mean, I think the idea that, let's say we are talking about a particular agent and what needs to be done about it, and one or another organizations may be very important in trying to look at pathways to limit exposure. So I think that is a possibility. I mean, just think, and you do need to look carefully and think things through, because your partners on papers will be your partners on paper for life. So you have to think about those implications.
From a journal perspective, as long as people are being very upfront in their declaring their conflicts of interest, who do they work for? Who have they taken money from? What lawyers are they working with, and who their clients are? Then, and if that the person that you're working with has things that would be embarrassed to be seen as a co-author on a paper with, then that might make the decision for you also, I think.
Yeah, I have just a quick response. Cindy has a question about commentaries that may have moved the needle. I've certainly written commentaries where we're trying to move the needle, and I'll say that because of the state of Colorado, I've become heavily involved in cannabis. And one of the things we did was to do a very large scoping review of all the evidence related to the higher concentration products now in the marketplace. And essentially, the research is not very good for a variety of reasons. But if you look at the latest issue of the American Journal of Public Health, there's actually a supplement on the need for research on cannabis. And we have a commentary there that it does sort of trying to move the needle. And we've done some other things. We're trying to move things forward in doing better research on cannabis. So we actually have a piece there that says, here we are, decriminalizing use of this now 24 states. It's widespread. Marketplace is changing. We don't know about the health risks of what is in the marketplace. We need research. We have a separate piece coming out that's basically comes out of a workshop we did on how to advance research. So we sort of have an agenda of which this commentary was a piece. So we are trying to use this pathway to make change. I don't know, Rob and Joel can point to, specific commentaries that sort of became the foundation for a switch. I'd have to think hard. I mean, sometimes in the tobacco world, I think some people commenting has made a difference. But I'd have to think this through.
Yeah, it's a good question. Commentaries that have moved the needle, and I wish I had a handful of them off the top of my head that I could point to. But I'm drawing a blank, unfortunately. I think that the commentaries that probably don't move the needle are the ones that say, this is a really important topic. It's what I've been working on, and it needs more funding or something like that. That's the message, right? That's a category that I think we could say universally are not moving the needle. But I think the ones that say this is an issue and I'm coming at it in a creative way, and I think that this needs policy attention, which I think are sort of to some extent the most interesting kind, are the ones that we hope move the needle, but I don't know that anybody's done an evaluation or find ones that are particularly meaningful. I think, I can't think of a perfect environmental health example, but I do think, people, who, continuously raise a point about, for example, how we screen the blood supply and the fact that we're doing it in a way which is discriminating against people who shouldn't be excluded from being able to donate blood or something like that. I think those kinds of commentaries have moved the needle and caused action. Um, um, does anybody here have anybody online think of a commentary which they believe has really moved the needle? Rob, anything?
No, I'm thinking, I mean, the one that John mentioned in JAMA, I think that got a lot of people thinking about respiratory effects of vaping, but I'm not sure. I think, we just happen to be the first to publish on it. I think and so you might say, oh, this had a big impact on policy. I think we were just the first out of the gate, actually, on this particular thing, and that other people would have thought of it, and it would have moved forward. I'm wondering if there are some historical examples of something that has moved the needle, maybe because it's controversial. Like I don't know the fluoride literature, but that's a controversial literature. And I remember the first time I heard about fluoride and neurodevelopment thinking, that's a really interesting idea. I never thought about that before. So I wonder if there are any early commentaries on fluoride or, other topics that became controversial. Maybe even like early lead exposure, or
I mean,
you know the history of environmental health better than anyone I know.
But, I mean, when you think about it, there's certainly, if you said, what about reports or reviews or sort of seminal environmental epidemiology articles, we would all start naming a list. I think, and then commentaries, I think just perhaps a bit different. There's a few other questions following on. Well, Joel, here's one. How can one determine from Victor if a paper is suitable for publication as a regular paper or if a commentary is more appropriate? That's a straight Joel.
Well, I mean, to me, that's really an issue of, is it a kind of a hypothesis testing undertaking or not? So, if you're kind of throwing something out as your opinion, then it's a commentary. If you're saying you undertook some work and this is the result, even if that work is a narrative review or a systematic review or something, then that's a regular paper. That's sort of where I would draw the line. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I'm just thinking about the role of commentaries now, and scholarly publishing has undergone enormous changes in the last couple of decades, and the days when a commentary was mostly brought to your attention because you received a print journal in the mail, and the commentary might be the first thing that you read because it was at the top of the table of contents. Isn't the way that most people are accessing scientific content right now. So right now, mostly you're gonna, you go to an online source for your publications and you look for the things you're interested in, and you don't, see the front matter even in the journal necessarily, which is where the commentaries would generally appear. So the way to get a commentary noticed is by either social media or news coverage of it, I think. And so maybe that becomes more important actually than any other part of the commentary process because of this change in the way publishing has worked. I mean, people aren't getting their JAMA on their desktop right now to look at right there, coming in the mail.
Well, I admit I still get a couple of journals hard copy, but that's old habit. No, that's Connie's question. I mean, the comment I'd make is about when writing a commentary on environmental justice, should we focus on one particular area or a particular thing? I mean, I think this goes back to sort of some of the generalities we started with. You've got to figure out what you want to comment on, and then do that. So I mean, environmental justice is such an expansive and pervasive concept that I think there you would have to say, here's the part of the topic that I really want to highlight and focus on and think that through. And maybe, for example, if your question's motivated by some particular research you've done, then you may want to go there. Just want to go back for a minute to the question about peer-reviewed scientific paper versus commentary. The one thing you have to be careful when you write a paper about here's what I found is don't turn the discussion into a commentary. That's sort of not what you should be doing. And sometimes that last paragraph ends up being sort of a commentary policy option. That's not where you say this means that EPA should regulate X at a concentration Y or something. So just be careful about what's a peer-reviewed scientific paper about research you've done versus a commentary. And I think that last paragraph, which is sometimes very hard to write, please don't end with more research is needed, is a place just to be careful.
So Hoffa has another question. Can we unmute him, Jonathan? And see if we can hear
it. And I also think someone just raised their hand as well. I don't see them anymore, but here we go.
I think you're gonna unmute Hoffa, Raphael, to us. There he is. Now can you talk?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. It says, what about including a true short story that illustrates the problem? Can it make a good impression, or is it?
I think if it's done well, it can be a nice sort of introduction to a commentary. I'm reminded of a commentary that Renee Salas had I think in the New England Journal on it was started off at climate and health, although it ended up more about environmental racism, I think, which was I started with an anecdote about a patient in the emergency room with asthma, and that why did they have asthma? Why were they having this exacerbation? And how we're not, it's because of environmental influences, and that's what's going on, and that isn't being thought about. Sort of that kind of a introduction is in biomedical journals is not problematic, I think, and isn't considered non-academic if it's done correctly and is sort of kept, is in a way that makes sense, I think. John, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it could be powerful to start with a story that is, says this is about real people and real problems.
It reminds me, for the rest of the group, we had a pre-meeting and we talked about sort of what the format of this might be. And I remember, John, you saying you made two commentaries or two comments in the course of that. One was that, it's really, really important to know how to tell a story, not in the sense of sort of a specific patient, but that, this is telling a story for people. And, that's true of a commentary. It's probably true of other fora as well. And I wonder, and then you said, we could spend a whole time talking about the first sentence. We could have a whole seminar on the first sentence of a commentary. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about, expand on that for this group.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, actually, the useful exercise maybe to doing this, Rob, to do first sentences. When I was chair of Epi at Hopkins, I once did a whole seminar on last sentences in papers, and it was pretty instructive. By the time we'd done about 20 or 25, the high prevalence of more research is that first sentence has to be a grabber, and it says what you're talking about and gives a hint that you're going to say something about it. And I think that, you really do need to think that through carefully when you do it. I see we have one from Q&A. Maybe we should get to that in our minutes. When should you include policy recommendations in the commentary? So, I mean, I think that's something you can do in a commentary, clearly, and you have that sort of license by the nature of the commentary. I think the only thing I would say is if you're sort of going back to the earlier discussion about working with people who may be more on the advocacy side, I think you want to sort of stick to the places around policy recommendations where the science would lead you. And but that's seems to be, perfectly appropriate. And I think you can find lots of examples of people, in the air quality world, for example, suggesting that this summary of the literature would suggest that a standard generally would be lowered or something changed about the standard. So I think that's entirely reasonable to do. Or, in the tobacco world, talking about things that the FDA should be doing, say, around flavors. Great example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's not room usually for these kinds of policy recommendations in a research paper. We usually say, leave that to the editorialists or leave that to somebody else. But in a commentary, there is room for people to say that, as long as what you're saying can be, backed up by, science or by, a theoretical framework at least that would do this. Okay. We're at the hour.
Thanks very much to the two of you and to the group who joined. It was such good advice. Now can we one of the things that John suggested when we met before was that people look for somebody more experienced to give them advice. So now can we extend an invitation to everybody to ask you for advice when they have a commentary?
I get an awful lot of things in the email to take a look at, and I'm usually happy to do it. So I will say that. So
Thanks very much. We have some new topics and people, and we're looking for dates. You'll hear more soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Bye, everybody. Bye, Rob. Bye, Joe.